Hey there, Mr. Reddit here. Welcome back to another episode of r/entitled Parent Stories. Our first story we'll be reading today. Am I the jerk for kicking out my mother and my sister? After that, entitled Mom and Service Dog Fiasco, complete with fake fainting. And after that, Chipotle. Once you get hired, you can never leave. Now for every thumbs up this video gets, one Karen does not get to see the new Space Jam. But I want to see LeBron. So please hit that like button and subscribe and turn on notifications for new stories from Reddit every single day. Am I the jerk for kicking out my mother and sister? I'm 21, female. I own my own place. I've lived here for a while now, and I loved my own peace living by myself with no kids or a spouse. My mom, who's 41, wasn't the best when I was growing up. She would bring guys in and out of the home all the time. I'm glad nothing ever happened to me, but it gave me a bad view for her once I grew up, and not a good relationship along with it. I have a sister, 22, who's disabled physically and mentally. I grew up with her, but it was extremely hard to form a relationship with her. I had to take care of her a lot growing up, because my own mom wouldn't do any of it due to mom wilding around. My sister and I shared a room growing up, and I hated every second of it, if I'm going to be honest. My mom has been renting for a place to live, and since a few months ago, she can't live there anymore. My sister still lives with my mom, and my mom doesn't take care of her actively. She pays for a caregiver. My mom guilt-tripped me into letting her and my sister live with me temporarily for a month. I eventually said yes. It was fine for the first few days. My mom and sister have been living here now for 3 months. My mom said only 1 month. I have to work a lot, so I'm barely there anyways. But when I have a day off, I hate every second of it. I know my sister cannot help it, that she makes noises, a lot of noises, loud noises. It's like I can hear it everywhere. The caregiver still cares for her, but it's like having a complete stranger in my home. Long story short, on my day off, after hearing everything and the noises and tantrums, I went insane and snapped. I told my mom she has to leave. She refused to leave at first, but eventually she did. The last thing she told me was, "You're supposed to be grateful that I gave you a home to live in, and you can't give that back? You're a jerk and always have been." I eventually told her to just leave, and my mom got my sister and they both left. I feel like I'm the complete jerk because of the fact that I told her to leave just because I was tired of my sister, even though she cannot help it at all. Am I the jerk? Edit. Thank you all for taking the time to comment. I have no new news about my mom or sister. I haven't spoken to her since she left. I haven't been able to reply to comments because I've been insanely busy today, but I just now read most of the comments. I appreciate it, and I started crying at some comments because they hit a soft spot for me. I appreciate the comments you guys left. Thank you. Edit. To those asking how I have my own house at 21, I was given a lawsuit settlement for undisclosed reasons. That's a whole different story unrelated to this. When I was 19, and I knew a particular person who was selling a house for cheap, so I snagged it. I would say it was an unlucky, lucky situation. Edit 3. I will be speaking to someone soon on my sister's behalf. I haven't ignored this whatsoever or forgot. I'm going to try to get my sister the proper care that she needs from someone or a place who does know how to do that. I do not want to take care of her anymore. Nearly half my life, I was doing just that. Just for a final edit, she does not need to stay with our mom. Entitled Mom and Service Dog Fiasco, complete with fake fainting. Hi, I'm Crack Elf, and I have a service dog for my seizures. Before I recount the tale of this humanoid embodiment of a wet fart, I need to say a handful of things about service dogs. In the US, there is no legit or legal certification or registration for service dogs. There is no paperwork or certificate. There's no set harness or vest that makes a service dog real, and service dogs aren't even required to wear anything identifying them. For a dog to be a service dog, you must be disabled. The dog must be trained to do work to help with the disability. Snuggling or "he makes me feel better by being around" do not count. And the dog must not have any kind of bite record. The dog also has to be trained to handle being in public. I went to the redacted mall with my service dog and ended up going into a home decor shop. She was wearing a Harry Potter themed vest, Slytherin pattern fabric, but was marked clearly as a service dog. She was sitting in a close heel. I suddenly hear loud, angry, excitable barking, and it sounded like it was coming from a big dog. My service dog has been attacked before, so I was kind of freaked out already. I was looking to see if there was a second exit to the shop when I saw the older woman, entitled Mom, with her severely obese, hyperactive Labrador and wildly overstimulated kid in tow. The lab was pulling at the end of his flexi lead, barking his head off, and it looked like his tiny vest was either going to snap or cut through his fat rolls. She had the flexi lead attached to his vest, and he wasn't wearing a collar. We're in a sort of weird standoff where I look like I'm one minor inconvenience away from a heart attack, and she's smirking, letting her dog bark, pull, and fling saliva everywhere. The thing was acting like Cujo, Bird Dog Edition. Entitled Mom gets her son's attention by snapping a few times and then pointing at my dog and says, as loudly as she possibly can, "See? That's a fake support dog. The real ones are always retrievers." I wasn't really sure what to say to that, because she's wrong, and her service dog is currently running in place at the end of its lead because it can't get any traction on the floor. I couldn't get past her because the little corridor to the exit was narrow enough for Cujo 2.0 to get a hold of my service dog. I settled on, "Move, I can't get past your dog." She immediately starts getting upset and claiming that my wolf hybrid, husky but okay, is actually vicious and her dog only wants to play. I just sort of told her to move again. She started yelling for an employee, claiming she felt she was in danger and they needed to kick me out with my fake service dog because said dog, who was standing directly beside me, completely silent, was a direct threat to her psychotic lab. An employee, who looks as if he gave up his happiness at the ripe old age of 15, "God, dude, I'm sorry you have to deal with this kind of person regularly," comes over and glances at me, then turns his attention to entitled Mom. The conversation followed. Employee: "Your dog is barking and not under control. Please leave. You can come back without him." Legal to request and enforce if the dog is acting like that. Entitled Mom: "Excuse me? Are you trying to deny me service because my son has a support dog?" said over the dog barking itself hoarse. Employee: "According to the Americans with Disabilities Act, employees can ask people with disruptive or aggressive dogs to leave. You can still return without him." "My son needs this dog. He can't leave the house without this dog." Whips out her phone, starts to dial 911. Me, still just looking for a way to get out of this store. Entitled Mom, on the phone with a 911 dispatcher, crying and screaming about how her son is being discriminated against because he has a service dog, getting more and more frustrated because the dispatcher is taking maybe a second too long. She demands that the dispatcher send EMS and the police. Son starting to cry because loud, angry mom is probably terrifying him. There's a short lull where her dog suddenly stops barking, sniffs the ground, and starts circling. He then pops a squat right in the Pottery Barn entryway, drops an almost liquid log so foul that it could curl a lumberjack's eyelashes. The employee sighs and tells her again to just leave, but not to come back. She resumes screaming. I zone out of reality and into the Wii Sports theme because I'm trapped in the store, not only by a possibly aggressive dog, but also by the river of molten doggy doo spread out in the entryway. Police and EMS arrive. They start asking three of us some questions. Employee and I are understandably losing the will to live. An entitled mom is screaming and gesturing wildly, yanking her crying kid around in the process. The cop turns to the employee and says, "Which dog made that mess?" Employee tells him the truth. It was entitled mom's dog. Entitled mom starts screaming about how this is discrimination against her son. The cop asks what task the dog performs. Legal. And she says emotional support. The cop, of course, tells her to leave because ESAs don't have public access rights. Entitled mom suddenly interrupts the cop and says that the dog is actually for her fainting episodes, and he barks when she is going to faint. Dog resumes barking and she dramatically faints. She said, "I'm fainting," and lowered herself to the ground, guarding her face, and then goes limp once she's on the floor. Everything is quiet for a moment until the cop says, "Ma'am," and she yells, "Get the EMTs. I fainted. I am injured." I have fully left this plane of existence and I'm now watching in third person. EMS trundle over with a stretcher, which she limply rolls onto, making those weird fatigued Southern Belle noises. Dog resumes barking. Son resumes crying. The EMTs ask who's going to take the dog because they are refusing to transport a possibly aggressive animal. Entitled Mom resumes screaming about her discrimination. Entitled Mom caves after they tell her she will not be going to the hospital until someone else has the dog. Entitled Mom yells for her husband for 2 minutes straight until he comes up, takes the barking dog, takes the kid, and leaves. Entitled Mom is shipped to the hospital and hopefully the psych ward. A janitor comes to clean up the river of liquid doggy doo in the entryway. Employee goes back to the usual drudgery of working at Pottery Barn, and I go home because my batteries are empty. Edit. If I see another well-intentioned but misinformed person rooting for mandatory documentation/certification for service dogs, I'm going to leave this plane of reality and take every dog, puppy, wolf, coyote, and dingo with me so no one can enjoy them anymore. Chipotle. Once you get hired, you can never leave. My wife has been mistaken for a Chipotle employee 2 times, with somewhat hilarious results, resulting in an argument with a manager who thought she was a sloppily dressed new hire and a woman who could only yell. So a bit of background. 7 years ago, in college, me and her used to work for Chipotle. In fact, it was where we met. As we worked there, we amassed quite the selection of Chipotle t-shirts, and for those of you who don't know, the design is a small Chipotle logo on the front and a large design on the back. Back in the early 2010s, the designs were quite imaginative and had some pretty cool art on the back, which actually might be something you might want to be seen wearing. My wife's friend, a woman who through remarkable patience and tenacity actually became successful in the company, who still works there, hooks her up with the newer shirts. And yeah, they're not as good as before, with boring designs talking about special offers and real ingredients. Eventually, working there became too much for me, and I fell out with the management and quit. I was so mad at them, I was going to burn my shirts as an act of catharsis, but my wife persuaded me to let her have them for work, even though they were way too big for her, and so she amassed quite the collection. I'd estimate it to be about 20. She persevered for a while after I left, getting promoted to a kitchen manager, and then after we left, the huge collection of work shirts became her loungewear and pajamas. It's like when I got hired, I could never really leave, because half the time I see a Chipotle girl wandering around the house. Harmless enough, but once or twice she's actually gone into a Chipotle wearing one of these shirts, and occasionally weird stuff happens. So the first one was about 2 or 3 years ago. We'd been out the previous night, it was a Saturday, and we'd both gotten pretty drunk. When we'd gotten home, I helped her into bed and she'd just thrown on a t-shirt and fallen asleep, and then me not long after. I woke up the next morning feeling a lot better, had breakfast, but she was still pretty hungover from the previous night, so I just sat and played games for a few hours until about noon. I went in and asked her if she wanted food, and she did, but she wanted to go to Chipotle, as she felt burgers would be gross in her hungover state. She'd been sleeping on her back, however, so I hadn't noticed that she was wearing one of her favorite shirts, a huge, oversized, for her, one that she had gotten from me that featured a lettuce shouting lechuga on the back, add an avocado, which replies Gesundheit. As I said, the old designs were actually quite cool and weird. She slipped on an old pair of Lakers basketball shorts, a hoodie which covered up her t-shirt, hence me not seeing it, and some sunglasses to hide her hangover, and then we left for Chipotle. She brightened up on the way considerably as well, so everything seemed fine. We got our food and started eating, and then, as it was hot, she took off her hoodie and then said she'd be off to the restroom. I didn't think much of this, and again, I didn't notice the back of her shirt, so for a while I carried on eating and finished, and then I'd noticed my girlfriend hadn't come back from the restroom, so I sent her a text asking if she was alright. She sent one back saying, long story, and then a few minutes later came back laughing. What had happened is she had gone to the restroom, and when she came out, ran into a woman who had asked her, "What do you think you're doing, coming in dressed like this?" It turned out this was the store manager. She thought my girlfriend was a new hire, and she proceeded to tell her off for coming in dressed in such a sloppy manner. An oversized uniform shirt and baggy basketball shorts give a poor impression of the company, and that she'd have to go back home and change, and that she was going to be written up. My girlfriend started to get angry in response. Then she looked down, and then at the reflection of the back of her shirt in the glass behind her, and realized the t-shirt she had thrown on last night was in fact, yes, a Chipotle uniform, so an easy mistake to make. She explained she was actually a customer, and this was her boyfriend's old work shirt, and started to apologize for coming in dressed this way and confusing the manager, at which point the manager apologized for telling my girlfriend off and they spent about a minute in a loop of apologizing to each other. Finally, the manager offered my girlfriend a buy one get one free card for the mistake, and so in the end there were no hard feelings. So we got some free food from this one, and it was hilarious as well. That was one of our experiences. The other was actually a few weeks ago, and since the last time, we got married, so she's now my wife. Now that lockdown is lifting and we can go out a little, a while ago we went to Chipotle on a Sunday evening, and yeah, my wife was rocking a Chipotle shirt again. We figured that as it was quite late in the evening, there wouldn't be many people there. It would be pretty chill, and we couldn't be bothered smartening up, so we just went as we were. Also, the store we frequent seems to always hire super nice staff as well, so it's always been good. We go in, and yeah, there's only 1 or 2 people there, so it should be fine, right? We order, and the guy who made our food for us gave her a double take, but didn't really say anything. The girl on cashier, however, smiles and says, "I like your shirt." And my wife says, "Oh, I don't work here." There is life after Chipotle, and they have a nice conversation about college and how things are nowadays and lockdown, etc. I think she was about 17, and she enjoyed the conversation so much that she gave us our meal for free. I leave a nice tip for the cashier and the other staff as well, because I remember how good that felt at the end of the shift. And so we're heading towards our seat, and the evening has a generally good vibe to it so far. However, then we hear, "No, you're doing my bowl wrong. I want this salad." Jab, jab, greasy fingerprints on sneeze guard. "You're still doing it wrong. My God, how stupid can you be?" And so on. And looking over my shoulder, I saw a woman who was one of these customers who is the nightmare of all Chipotle workers. The self-entitled customer who believes that by yelling and creating a scene, they can get whatever they want. If you're wondering why everything she said is in all caps, it's because she never lowered her voice and stopped yelling while she was in the store. It's the only way I can get across how obnoxious it was to be around her. We sit down, and then she finally gets her bowl made, exactly how she wanted it. But it wasn't good enough, and when she gets to our previously happy cashier, she proceeds to chew her out for being super slow and overpriced. "My God, this place is a disgrace," and is just making her life a misery. The cashier is trying to placate her as best as she can, and an equally stressed manager, I don't think much older, appears and tries to calm down her Karen-ness, but the woman just won't stop. I just shook my head and started eating, but the manager must have done something to get her to leave them alone, because the Karen went and sat by the door after making a scene of snatching up her food and storming to a table. Karen clearly made quite an impact on the cashier as she ran off to the back to cry, leaving her equally miserable-looking manager in her place, and generally everything just feels bad now. We just finished our food and walked out, but as we go past the Karen on the way to the door, we hear, "Hey, you. Yeah, you, girl." And we stop. My wife turns around and says, "Excuse me, ma'am?" And Karen goes, "Yeah, I know you're leaving work with your boyfriend, but as your manager, I want to make a formal complaint." My wife turns back to me, grins, and mouths, "What the heck?" Because although she is wearing a Chipotle shirt, she's also wearing neon green running shorts, flip-flops, and a backwards green and yellow baseball cap, none of which are part of the approved uniform. This isn't how Chipotle managers dress, although I guess Karen figured she was slightly older than the rest of them. She's 28, and thus was a senior manager. My wife finished her time at Chipotle as a kitchen manager, and I guess the fact this customer made our new favorite cashier cry meant that she wanted a little payback for all of the times she'd been in the same situation. She does a very, very good customer service persona, all bubbly and sweet, and she slipped right back into it and then walked over to her and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. How can I help you?" Karen then goes off into a rant about how the store is badly run. She was kept waiting when clearly trying to mess around and go on a little power trip, and how the employees are all stupid, and no wonder they were all minimum wage and blah blah, generally being a jerk. My wife just listens intently and says with a smile, "Well, ma'am, those are some interesting observations, but I think you can just go forget yourself." Karen is stunned for a second, as well as the staff behind the counter, who seem to be enjoying watching someone stand up to Karen, and then says, "I'm writing to head office, and you're out of a job, missy. Give me your name." At which point my wife says, "I'm first name." Karen writes down her name and then says, "You'll be hearing from head office after they hear from me." At which point my wife says, "And I haven't been a manager at Chipotle for quite a long time, so I can pretty much say whatever I want to you. Karen just stares at her and says, "But you're wearing their shirt." To which she responds, "Yeah, I'm wearing it because it's a cool shirt and I used to work here. It doesn't mean I work here now, so I can tell you that you're being a massive jerk who likes taking her anger out on people much younger than her, and that I think everybody would prefer it if you just buzz off and stop throwing your weight around because Chipotle can't fire me." Karen is stunned, processing a girl in a Chipotle shirt telling her off instead of placating her, and then she pushes past us and says, "This is a disgrace, never coming here again," and slams the door behind her, and then drives off quickly. I'm just processing what happened as it was weird, and my wife goes back over to the two girls behind the counter to apologizing for saying that to a customer. I guess as in Karen's eyes, she was a representative of the company, but the girls were cool with it and quite happy that she did stand up to the Karen. And also it was just a customer versus customer interaction, despite appearances. So moral of the story, if you ever work a fast food job and want to go back there, check you're not wearing the old uniform before you go in. Edit. Apparently, it's not an egg saying Gesundheit, but an avocado, as it was just pointed out to me. Speaking of Chipotle, what's your favorite place to go eat? Please let us know. Nothing tops McDonald's. Entitled dad tries to cut in line because his son needs his meds. Incident turns physical. To add some context before the whole story goes down, I recently suffered an injury at my work. I was granted time off to recover psychologically and physically. I've lost an unhealthy amount of weight, and I'm quite tall, so I look kind of odd. Now on to the story. So I'm waiting at the counter at my local pharmacy. I'm waiting for a pretty big pickup of medications. I'm pretty stressed because it's quite busy in the pharmacy. I couldn't really figure out why, but I think it had to do with giving out some sort of shots. While I'm waiting, a man with a Blue Jays ball cap, entitled Dad, and his kid line up behind me. At this point, it's taking longer than I anticipated for my meds to come in, and I can tell the man behind me is getting quite impatient. Entitled Dad says, "Hey, excuse me, can we go up?" I respond, I think they're almost done." A few more minutes pass, and the meds haven't come in. Ball cap guy, entitled Dad, is getting increasingly impatient, and my social anxiety is clawing at the back of my head. Entitled Dad says, "I'm going in front of you, buddy." I say, "Can you wait a bit longer? I really need..." Entitled Dad responds, "Yeah, right, buddy," and pushes past me to the pharmacist counter. Entitled Dad yells, "Excuse me, can I get my kid's medicine?" The nice pharmacist lady, who happens to be my girlfriend's older sister, comes to the counter. We're very familiar with each other, and she's always been super nice and helpful. She looks a bit flustered and irritated. Girlfriend's sister goes, "We're just sorting out someone else's medications at the moment. Can you wait a bit longer?" I'm the only other person at the counter, so it's apparent who's causing the wait. Entitled Dad, "So you'll give this fiend his medications, but not my kid?" At this point, my social anxiety kicks in full drive, and my fight or flight instincts are raging. I'm using every fiber of my being to hold back tears. Girlfriend's sister glares at Entitled Dad and says, "Sir, you are going to wait your turn. No discussion. We're almost done." Entitled Dad gets angry. "My kid needs his pills." I look at the kid, and he's dead silent. He looks like he wants to run away as badly as I do. Girlfriend's sister, "Sir, if you don't calm down, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." At this point, everyone in the pharmacy is staring at the commotion, and I start crying uncontrollably. And I try to say, "He can just go ahead," to diffuse everything, but I'm pretty sure it came out as gobbledygook. Entitled Dad looks at me and screams, "What the heck are you crying about?" and starts approaching me. I'm all too familiar with confrontation in my work, and I start freaking out. I turn to run away, but I feel something shove me, and I fall onto the floor. It didn't hurt. My fear just overwhelmed me, and I curled up into a ball on the floor and cried. I hear a lot of screaming and yelling between the pharmacy employees and the man. After what eventually felt like forever, some policemen arrive. Policewoman tries to ask me if I'm all right before questioning me. My girlfriend's sister was infuriated that they were questioning me, and she answered everything for me. The policeman took Entitled Dad outside, and my girlfriend's sister took me out back and drove me crying to my girlfriend's apartment. Edit. I want to thank everyone so much for the kind words and support. Life is hard right now, but it's always reassuring kind folks like you exist. 6 feet out or 6 feet up. I was reminiscing with my family about my late grandfather and some of the tomfoolery he got up to. I thought this story made a perfect post for this sub. Backstory. Decades ago, my grandparents purchased a large plot of land out in the middle of nowhere with the idea to build themselves a home and retire on that plot. They were both from the rural Midwest, so they originally wanted to keep the horses, chickens, and maybe a few other small farm animals on this land, hence the size. As the years went by and they started actually making plans, they realized that horses weren't really feasible for a variety of reasons. By that time, the area around their plot of land had been significantly more developed, so they instead split the plot into 8 pieces and sold the other 7, essentially financing their original purchase and the construction of the house, leaving their retirement and pension untouched. Because of their incredibly advantageous position, they made a point to only sell to like-minded buyers, friendly retirees who were looking for their last home and wanted a bit of the same rural isolation that my grandparents wanted. The result is that my grandparents ended up with their dream bungalow on a spacious lot surrounded by friendly neighbors and without any major time or money obligations. They ended up spending a lot of time volunteering and generally making friends with the community that was growing around them. The event. The area ended up becoming incorporated, and the town they were now living in eventually decided that the 2-lane blacktop road needed to be repaved and upgraded with sidewalks, gutters, and all the other amenities townspeople expect. Now, the county that the town was incorporated from had planned ahead, and there was plenty of room set aside for exactly this type of project, so none of the residents needed to move their fences or give up property to the state. However, most of them had placed their mailboxes on a post about a half dozen feet from their property line, nearer to the road so that the postman had easy access. When the construction started, a city representative visited each property on this street and gave them a heads up on what to expect, and also asked that the residents move their mailboxes to make room for construction. My grandfather, being of light schedule and helpful demeanor, offered to help his neighbors temporarily relocate their mailbox and post. He had retired from a career as a handyman, and several of his kids owned landscaping or similar businesses. So he and my uncle spent a few hours with a mini backhoe and unearthed all 8 of his neighbors' mailbox posts, cement and all. He saved the posts to reinstall when the road was complete and mounted the mailbox proper on each property's fence. The issue. Lo and behold, on Monday they had no mail service. After a bit of investigation, they realized none of their neighbors did either. So the next morning, my grandfather waited outside to see what the problem was. Right on time, the mailman drove down their side of the street, completely ignoring all 8 properties. Redoubling his efforts, the next morning my grandfather was able to flag the mailman down and ask what the problem was. According to my grandfather, the very curt response was, "I'm not required to deliver to any mailbox more than 36 inches from the edge of the road." A call to the Postal Service confirmed this rule. The mailman may deliver outside that limit if they want, but they are not required to. The compliance. Now, it's pretty amazing what you can get done with 8 business hours of free time. The problem was that 36 inches from the current edge of the road is in the way of construction. My grandfather spoke to the construction supervisor, who was sympathetic, but just as stuck as my grandfather was. My grandfather then visited the postal office and returned with a current copy of the regulations about mailbox locations. After a few hours of study and another visit to the construction supervisor's office with a half dozen donuts and some coffee, he had formulated a plan. Remember his sons who ran a landscaping business? My grandfather got in his truck and visited both businesses. He returned home with 8 20-gallon plant pots. These things are huge, 30 inches tall, and just about as large around. You see, while the construction guys couldn't mess with a federally protected, fixed mailbox, they were happy to move a pot out of their way in the morning and back when the job was finished for the day. My grandma makes some pretty darn good donuts, which is a pretty easy task when you have earth-moving equipment nearby. So each post was replanted in a 20-gallon pot, and each mailbox was remounted on a post, and each pot was placed conservatively within 36 inches of the current road's edge. The kicker was that a mailbox post that is meant to stick 4 feet out of the ground has at least 2 feet buried in the ground. In other words, it's a 6-foot post. When you post that inside a pot with a few inches of soil underneath and that pot on the surface of the ground, a mailbox on top is easily more than 6 feet in the air. You see, the mailbox codes clearly specify how far horizontally a mailbox needs to be from the road, but says nothing about how high that mailbox needs to be. It took a few more conversations with a postman and a visit from the local inspector, but the mailman spent the better part of 6 months delivering to 8 mailboxes 6 feet in the air rather than walk the extra 6 feet to the fence. Am I the jerk for telling my boyfriend I can't afford to feed his kids right now? Hi Reddit. I really need the unbiased opinion of internet strangers and accept any and all judgment. For context, my boyfriend, 36 male, and my son and I, 36 female, live together, and for the moment I am the main breadwinner. Boyfriend pays his portion of the rent and I then pay for everything else. Food, utilities, my portion of the rent, fuel, basically everything else. And I have to budget like crazy to cover everything. I don't have a great salary either, but better than his. He's working on bettering his situation, and I support us with an open heart. No resentment and no expectations on repayment. He has 2 kids from a previous relationship that visit us semi-regularly when he's off work. So on to the issue. Last week, he kind of sprung it on me that his kids were coming to stay the night. I asked him nicely to let me know a bit sooner next time so that I could work my money situation. I reworked some things to feed all of us, and everything is good. I made a bunch of pancakes. Yesterday, he tells me that they're coming again. I think the ex is asking, and I ask if it's after I get paid. He says no, it's not. I say as gently as I can that it's the end of the month and I can't really afford 2 extra mouths right now. I'm having to borrow to make ends meet for the week as it is. He blows up, says he doesn't see his kids and it's not my responsibility, and he'll sell his car for money if he has to. I love him and I love his kids, but the reality of the situation is that I can literally not feed them too right now. I know it's just 2 kids and a few extra meals, but it's the reality of our situation. And one of the kids is a preteen that eats a lot more than I do some days, and that's okay. Please bear in mind that boyfriend has no money at all for extra anything. Am I the jerk for saying I'm not able to accommodate his kids right now?
Click this button to join as a member today, and we'll give you a shout out in our next video.
And you have got to come watch this video next. You're really not going to believe what happens in this one.